Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the Valley of the Judged. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me as always is my good brother here in the temple, coming to us from Distorted Illuminations, good brother Monarch.
And as usual, I have come through this chapter in advance to make sure we're not going to get random dick on screen.
Yeah.
We are in the clear for this chapter.
And there's not going to be as much compared to others, and this is mostly gonna be final thoughts as much as it is vehicle rules. But we are at the final episode regarding Hellas. Obviously not the final episode of the Valley. And last time around, I kind of skimmed a bit on the different vehicles because it would be much like going through equipment, just going through stats. This time around, we have the vehicle rules proper. So maybe it's just me, but shouldn't vehicle rules have been placed before we actually got to, the vehicles?
I mean, I thought the same thing about the core rules, but what can you do?
Yeah, it's sometimes organization in games is going to be a bit weird. Sometimes it'll make sense for at the table, but not necessarily make as much sense for when you're covering it in a segment by segment basis, like what we're doing or what J. Stephen Onyang does on his blog.
It's not something I'm really going to hold too much against the book, though.
As long as it's navigatable. As long as it's navigatable, that's my main concern. Because if you have that and you don't have like an index or you don't have a proper table of contents or those sort of things, that's when we start having problems. That's when you start getting into the Rifts territory, and that's not a place you want to be.
I wouldn't say it's that bad here.
No.
Not a fan, but it's serviceable.
Yeah. But the first thing to note is the vehicle piloting roll, which is dexterity plus skill plus the vehicle's maneuver. In most cases, when piloting/driving a vehicle, the hero rolls the piloting roll. In some instances, at the GM's discretion, the vehicle's maneuver may not be rolled or may even replace the hero's dexterity attribute when rolling. I could see that, because no matter how dexterous you are, there's only so much you're going to be able to do with the interface of your vehicle. Just ask any motorsport driver, especially the ones who have their crash out moments. Guys like Mazepin, the running meme because he ended up finding a way to piss off half the grid. But then we have the vehicle attributes. We already mentioned maneuver, which is similar to dexterity. It ensures the responsiveness of the vehicle, also determines or affects a vehicle's ability to avoid incoming attacks, and is used as a modifier for some pilot skills. Hull, which is akin to Constitution, is the durability of the vehicle. Hull checks are required when a vehicle is reduced to 0 HP and when confronted with certain types of weapons. Sensors is akin to Perception, the ability to see other vehicles and hazards. Also uses an additional modifier to computer ship systems rolls. And Speed measures the maximum velocity of a vehicle during combat or other tactical situations. Some spacecraft may be able to travel at far greater speeds when cruising between planets. See interplanetary travel. We'll get to that later. And acceleration is the acceleration ability. While speed measures top speed, acceleration measures the amount of a vehicle can accelerate in one round. Then we give an example of a spacecraft with speed plus 40, currently traveling at speed plus 20, and has an acceleration of 5. So it's basically how much speed you can go up each round. Deceleration is, well, deceleration. It's measuring how much you can slow down in one round. As anyone who's driven something at high speed will tell you, you're not slowing down on a dime unless you're already the speed of slow, and even then, even then, that's pushing it. And the slip space drive. The higher the rating, the faster the ship may travel in slip space. A rating of 0 means the ship has no slip space drive and no capacity to enter slip space on its own. And size, which is self-explanatory. But we do have a size chart here. 1 is a cycle, 2 is a ground car, 3 is a large truck or a fighter craft, 4 is a space transport, 5 is a capital ship, 6 is a carrier, and 7 through 10 would be a space station. And then we have the vehicle movement rates. And I'll let you take the first one, which is speed scales.
So the vehicle rules in the Halas game are streamlined enough that you will often be able to use them in the narrative flow of your game without miniatures or map grids. For more complicated vehicle sequences, usually those involving more than 2 or 3 vehicles, these items will be very helpful as they make tracking the positions of vehicles a simple task. So it's streamlined enough you can use it without a grid, but a grid can be good if it gets really complicated. Alright.
Mhm.
These rules will allow you to handle any kind of vehicle, from cars to spacecraft. However, the capabilities of these vehicles vary so radically you'll need to use different scales on a map to represent their movement. The default speed and movement rate used for characters works equally well for most ground vehicles, but the scale tends to break down when dealing with aircraft and even more so when dealing with spacecraft, as these two classes of vehicles typically travel far beyond speed of most ground-based traffic. Typical aircraft might be able to move up to 6,000 meters in a round. That's a speed of plus 400 using the character speed scale, and spacecraft can travel much faster. As a result, Halas uses three separate speed scales. The aircraft scale multiplies the regular character movement by 10 and the spacecraft by 100.
Mhm.
And for speed itself, every vehicle has a top speed listed. This value is simply the maximum speed the vehicle is capable of moving in a single round. A vehicle's current speed can range anywhere between -5 and its top speed. Remember that a vehicle's speed is always based on the scale for its vehicle class. And then you get modifiers.
Mhm.
The speed at which a vehicle is traveling imposes a modifier on all drive or pilot rolls to operate the vehicle. Performing a maneuver at very high speed is more difficult than performing the same maneuver at lower speed. Penalties start when a character travels faster than its normal cruising speed. Then we got a nice little chart here. Cruising speed or below is a +0. +5 over cruising speed hits -2. And it's just an additional -2 for every 5.
Mhm.
We got changing speed. A pilot or driver can change the speed of his vehicle once each round is a free action. All vehicles have an acceleration and deceleration value. The listed number is the value for moderate acceleration or deceleration, or how much a pilot can speed up or slow down at moderate risk of losing control of the vehicle. Low acceleration or deceleration is half the listed number, high is twice the listed number, and extreme is 4 times the listed number.
Mhm.
Then again, we got a nice little chart here for the adjustments to DOED based on that.
Mhm.
And a bit more on slip space drive ratings. A slip space drive is ranked by a rating. The higher the number, the faster the drive. Most civilian ships have a rating of 1 or lower, when military vessels typically have a rating of 2 or higher. Each interstellar journey has a duration in days. Divide the duration by the ship's rating to find out how long it takes the ship to reach the destination.
Then we have stunts and maneuvers. In addition to changing speeds, pilots and drivers can perform a wide range of maneuvers in their vehicles. In a single round, a pilot or driver can perform one maneuver and one other action, such as an attack, or two maneuvers without incurring any multiple action penalties. Maneuvers require a pilot or drive omni-table roll, and the modifiers for the vehicle's current speed and maneuver rating are always applied to the roll. See a table below for a list of maneuvers and their degree of difficulty modifiers. Maneuvers are typically executed while the vehicle is traveling in the forward direction. Many ground vehicles can travel in reverse and can execute maneuvers while doing so. However, drive rolls for all maneuvers made while traveling in reverse suffer a -4 penalty. So the first option we have is turns, i.e. turning, which can range from a soft turn, so one arc to the left or the right, to an Immelmann turn, a half loop and a half roll at a penalty of 20. Avoid hazard, which the degree of hazard determines the degree of difficulty. Jump, you may attempt to jump over an obstacle. The degree of difficulty is at GM's discretion, but it will involve the length of jump as well as the speed maneuverability of the vehicle attempting the jump. I feel like this needed a degree of difficulty range the way turns and avoid hazard does, simply because of the wide range that you're dealing with when it comes to vehicles.
That would be nice.
Yeah. Then on failure rolls, when a pilot or driver fails a maneuver, a number of different things can happen. On a partial success, the pilot may complete the maneuver anyway, but partially lose control of the vehicle, thereby requiring another pilot or drive roll the following round to regain control of the vehicle. The following are some examples of the possible effects of a partial success. So, slip, you're playing slip and slide. And then there's slide. And if you have a failure roll, you could skid or spin. Or go into a full-on collision, with which a collision, you sustain damage based on your current speed and the size of the object or vehicle you collide with. The base damage caused by a collision to both the moving vehicle and the object it strikes is equal to speed plus 20. Armor and shields negate the appropriate amount of damage. However, if the vehicle crashes into a moving object, such as another vehicle, the GM must determine the total speed of the impact and use that as the base damage of the collision instead. If the two vehicles are moving directly toward each other, add their speeds together for purposes of determining collision damage. If they're moving in the same direction, use the difference in speeds, and if they're moving at angles to one another, use the highest speed. Passengers in a vehicle that collides or crashes take half the damage actually dealt to the vehicle, after accounting for the vehicle's PR. Passengers who make a successful con roll with a DOD of -1 for every 10 points of speed the vehicle was traveling take half this damage. Half the passenger's armor PR is counted to mitigate damage. Collisions are modified by the size of the vehicles in the crash. If a small vehicle hits a vehicle that is at least 2 scales larger, the large vehicle takes half damage, while the smaller vehicle adds twice the large ship's size to the damage. And I feel like what I'm seeing with the way damage and the way these stunts work feels like it's something that would be better served, is going to be most naturally served not necessarily in full grid, but having them on some sort of gridless map. You know, just because of angle and orientation being things you're taking into account with this. God help someone if they end
Yeah,
up.
this seems to immediately fly in the face of the earlier statement of, yeah, it's kind of made so you can do this pretty easily without. It's like, nah, I think you kind of want something for it.
Yeah. Am I saying that? Am I saying that this is built with grid combat in mind? No, but it is very much leaning into having minis or their equivalent on the board. I'm reminded of one time when I tried to do naval combat abstractly, and I used I used a copy of Battleship to do it. In my defense, you work with what you've got. But then we have vehicle combat. Now I'll let you take that.
So, under the Hellas rules, vehicle combat is fast and furious. Rather than dealing with all the nitty-gritty minutia, Hellas instead uses an abstract system not unlike that used for the more common melee and ranged combat experienced by player characters. Essentially, when engaged in vehicle combat, the vehicle itself can be viewed as a character with its own attributes, using the ones we've read through earlier. At its core, the Hellas game is about the characters. It is not a vehicle combat game that focuses on battles between fleets and spacecraft. Instead, there will undoubtedly be occasions for characters to engage in ship-to-ship combat in space, or combat between tanks and other vehicles. The following rules are intended to allow for those occasions. So it plays out almost identically to a normal character versus character combat. There's an initiative phase, player state intent, etc. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it basically plays out like typical combat with its own set of modifiers. Use your sense plus 1d20 for initiative. Determine orientation. After the player indicates his actions and describes intent, Game Master determines if there's a bonus or penalty, just kind of like any other check we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
We got ship position. A ship position determines its bonus to start or be targeted in combat. For example, if your position is head-on, you may fire the front arc, add both attacker's speed and target speed, -1 for every 10 points of speed, side, rear. Nice little chart with all the different modifiers.
Mm-hmm.
It'll look, I think at this point, we might basically just be recovering what we've already talked about for combat.
Yeah, it does go
outside of missiles.
Yeah, it does go into the combat action roll works largely similar. You are judging the results on that same action table that we've talked about in the past. That's one of the big things with the Omni system.
I do want to specify, but it looks like it's probably just something we're going to skip over just because it'd be a little redundant and repetitive to read stuff we already have. That's not a problem on the book.
Yeah.
Because there are some unique modifiers that you'd want to look over. So it's nice to actually have this here.
Yeah. That includes vehicle damage. I will bring up slip space drives, though. When characters travel to another system and they didn't get someone else to do the driving, they follow 4 steps. Determine the destination and duration, make calculations for the interstellar journey, figure out the navigation penalty, find out the navigation's results. Then you do have a few benchmarks. It takes 1 standard week to travel 1 parsec. A parsec is 3.262 light years. Traveling in the shore of slip space, 1 parsec per 2 weeks. Traveling in the open sea of slip space, normal time. Traveling in the nether regions of slip space, 4 parsecs per week. Cannot take advantage of travel routes. Think of the shore, open sea, and nether. Think of those as layers of hyperspace. They refer to it as slip space in this, but it's in the same vein. And especially the reason for it is because, as you can see in the image, you kind of have sails when going in slip space. Now, that being said, destination and duration, it is self-explanatory. Calculations has a few guidelines. You can rush the calculations, but suffer a -3 difficulty. If it's a pre-routed coordinate, calculations take a minute. If it's a little bit less so, they can take longer, up to 1 day. Then figuring out the navigation difficulty. So if you first off, the strata of Slipspace. Shore, no modifier. Open sea, -2. Nether region, -10. There's also a -1 per 5 parsecs traveled. For each extra week added to the trip, +1. For each week saved, -1. For any obstacles, arranged between -1 to -10. If it's not on a standard route, it's -2. If it's on a trade route, it's +3. And if you don't have a nav computer, it's -10. And then we have the results. The higher tier of result just means that you were able to get there and possibly get there in less time. And probably not a good idea to get to roll mishap with this, since it means you'd be off course by 10 parsecs. Then after that, it goes into trade routes, which taking trade routes has some advantages and disadvantages. On one hand, they're easier they're easier to navigate, safer, and faster. On the other hand, it's a one-way thing. They're heavily patrolled, and they're hard to escape if you end up pissing off the authorities. There is also the risk of slipspace storms, which can mess around with travel speed, obviously, much like sailing in choppy waters. I think that's what the intent is for this. But that more or less covers the vehicle rules, and thus that covers that means that all the major stuff we intended to cover we now have when it comes to Hellas. So this is as good a time as any to go into our final thoughts on this game. For me personally, if I were to put it in my review metric, I think Hellas would go under recommended. The only reason I'm not putting it in strongly recommended is there are certain little guidance issues in certain bits with the mechanics, especially the multiple action penalty, that don't exactly sit with me.
That multi-action penalty is kind of what started turning me on this one a little bit.
I'd say that, and dynamism is not something I'm going to recommend people dip into their first time around. That being said, I do think some degree of guidance is something that I would advise if by some miracle a 3rd edition ever came around. Mostly because there's a lot of variety in what you can potentially do for your character in this system, especially with it being point-based. So I think presenting a few archetypes as far as what you can lean into is something that I would advise. I'd have to double check to see if that may have been handled in some of the expansion books. It's been a while. And obviously, if it is, it's not going to count in this for reasons I've mentioned in the past. But let me.
One thing I will give this game, it is not shy or lacking at all in just style and flavor.
Yeah.
You get a feel for what this is going for really quick.
Mm-hmm. So I do have to correct myself. There was a PDF of just sample characters, of 9 different sample characters. Though though what I said before, though it feels like those were more for pre-gens for like running this at Gen Con. And some of the other books that I have as far as expansions don't really address that particular issue. And again, if it's off the table, it doesn't count. But I do think that that's something that should be utilized. I also think, and this is something I had talked with you about before we went live. This is another one of those games that has NPCs work on the same metric as PCs. This was something that was all over the place for decades, especially in more freeform games. And I'm not sure if I'm the biggest fan of it.
On one hand, I get it. I understand what you're going for, and I mentioned this to you too. When it comes to like just building the occasional character, I really like building them like you would a PC.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something I want to do for the norm. Sometimes I think people tend to forget how much work these games are on the DM.
And when it comes
to build so many like a character, that's so much more work than it should be.
Yeah, this is the reason why that sort of a lot of games that I've covered have almost a tier system when it comes to NPC creation. You have the simple end of things, which is meant to be the books, the henchmen, the guys who show up in droves and die in droves. And then you have the real threats, your mini bosses, or if you're a fan of Disgaea, your mid bosses, which are built with the full range, largely because they're going to be getting a much bigger focus. And I think one of the other things to note has to do with the vehicle systems that we saw here. I feel like there's a bit of one hand's not washing the other, if you catch my drift. You know, it's talking about how can be used for a more abstract non-grid affair, but some of the mechanics involved didn't seem to quite get that memo.
Yeah, there's a few times their descriptions in this game don't really seem to play out mechanically. Like, I remember back when we first started talking about the game, it mentioned something about, you know, there's a really good chance one of your characters is going to die, and it mentioned something about, like, descendants.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounded like that might be playing a part in what was to come, and it just never comes up again. Which I'm a little disappointed by.
I mean, I get the idea. I just think it didn't. Would you have preferred that there was some sort of like inheritance system, like say Rogue Legacy, where your descendant can get something from its predecessor?
By virtue of the fact that came up, and it does kind of fit the theme of this kind of world, I like something like that. But if you're not going to include it, don't set me up like that.
Don't. It's a case of if you're gonna put Chekhov's gun on the table, you better make sure that gun gets used.
Yeah.
Or to reference Hitchcock, if the bomb is under the table, make sure that it blows up. Oh. But it's none of these things are broken when it comes to the game. There's just a bunch of little things that don't quite mesh with the theme that it's trying to go for. I think is the big thing. So that's the reason why I didn't put it as strongly recommended. That being said, when it comes...
I might put it under like a cautious recommend myself.
You'd put it as caution?
Almost.
Caution's the second lowest tier on the list.
Yeah.
I know you said caution, but were you thinking more playable?
I think so. Is that the one on your list right below recommend?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay then. Yeah, it's playable.
Mm-hmm.
I'd put it somewhere between that and recommend right now.
Yeah.
Especially because I think you'd want to rework how the multi-action thing goes. That's going to be the big one for me.
For context, the way it works is recommended is good, but there's just a few things that hold it back from being great. Caution is not caution. Playable is good, but you may have to do some house ruling, a bit more significantly. Caution, you're gonna have to do a fair bit of house ruling, or it's gonna be for something very, very specific. And avoid is there's too many caveats for me to recommend it to people. And
yeah, so I'll go playable then.
Yeah.
On this one.
And thank you, Seth, for the follow. Hope you enjoy the madness. But when it comes to this particular game, if there's nothing else, the strength of setting, I think, really, really helps here. You know, this...
I do wish a lot of the things we covered had just that good of a strength of setting, because this was a really well done idea in that regard.
Mm-hmm. And as a bit of an aside, I will note one of the supplementary materials, and I love that this was done, even though it's completely unnecessary. Provides recipes for different foods you might find in Greece.
Nice.
It is completely not necessary to do it, but it does. Like there is a whole recipe, ingredients and all, on how to do mosca. Which, for those who don't know what that is, probably because they haven't had enough Greek food, I describe mosca as an eggplant casserole or eggplant-based lasagna. I know that Kentucky Ballistics has the whole thing of nobody likes eggplant. Grilled eggplant's not that bad, actually. No, you've got that, or hortavrasta, which is a kind of boiled greens, and just I don't know why, but providing in-universe food recipes is something I always appreciate.
Yeah. I like little touches like that.
Mm-hmm.
They make me smile.
I remember that some of the books in Fate Forge did that a lot. They had in-universe food and how to make it. Because look, some tables are perfectly fine with Funyuns and Mountain Dew, and some tables treat gaming night like a potluck. I have been in several cases where it's been the latter. Sometimes I've been the one organizing it like a potluck. In that case, it was mostly because I was sick of people bringing in Cheetos for obvious reasons. But
Keep those hands away from my fucking books.
oh yeah. And then says a potluck of Cheetos and Mountain Dew. That's not a potluck. That's not how that works. That's not how any of that works. But as a bit of an aside, I do appreciate that one of the expansion materials is called Princes of the Universe. They knew what they were doing. Especially since the back cover opens with "Here we are." And if hearing that, you end up hearing Freddie Mercury in the back of your head, one, you're welcome. Two, don't get mad at me. Get mad at the writers, because that is very much knowing your audience. I'll put it that way. I'd say if there's anything that I think could use a bit more guidance as far as priority, maybe dynamism, because there's a lot of stuff that can be done with dynamism, and as is, it's very much a higher floor affair compared to the rest of the game. But I'm not going to slag the Omni system in this. I actually like how it's set up. I think people who enjoy the way that PBTA has the whole partial and full success thing, but want a little bit more to it, will gravitate to this a little bit easier than people who who have a background in the world's most litigious role-playing game. But anything else? Anything you think could be expanded on if a follow-up is done?
I'm with you. Some guidance along things with the dynamism. Again, I'd like some kind of an inherited system for if your character dies to pass along because they brought it up first. And the multi-action thing, I think, needs reworked.
Well, if I'm being honest, as far as how that might be reworked, based on what I'm seeing, I think providing a higher upper cap based on actions could be one way that it's done. I suppose another way would be actually no what there would be an easy way to handle that cap just by using glory, i.e. you only start dealing with multi-action penalties at a certain based on your glory. You know, every 10 points adds one action to that.
Yeah. Think that makes sense.
You know, so if your glory is 25, you can do 2 actions unpenalized. Because the big reason for that is this is trying to be a space opera. Space operas have larger than life characters. This isn't space operas are not grounded affairs, and given the source material this is drawing from, having this be a more grounded affair would be somewhat of a contradiction. So that would be my suggestion. Now, does that mean that somebody's going to be doing could do a ridiculous amount of actions if they're high glory? Yeah, but you'd kind of expect that if someone has high glory, that there's some legendary hero / demigod.
I think that'd be a good way to do it. Like, off the top of my head, I don't know if that's the number I'd go with. But that's just because, no hands-on experience with the system, really.
I'm just throwing that out there.
But in premise, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I like the idea.
Yeah. Like, I thought about having some sort of action range based on what stats are being used, but I could see that creating new problems. Whereas there's already a power level like metric when it comes to glory, so why not use that?
Yeah, I think it'd be an issue tying it to one of your normal stats, because I think that'd create the issue of that stat's obviously more important than all the others now.
Look at Dex in D&D/Pathfinder. Now that is a god stat.
That's a bit of a different issue, because I would say other stats are tied to things that are more impactful, whereas Dex is just tied to a lot of things. So I think that's a different issue than what would go on here.
Mm-hmm. But with that said, as mentioned, that is going to wrap up our take on Hellas, but that doesn't mean that the Valley is over. So, in about a week's time, we're going to be back with our requisite between season one-shot. And if memory serves, we're handling Cascade Effect next, which is... We'll be able to go through the entirety of that in one go, especially since it is free. and after that, we will be starting on... I don't know why it's written like that. On the schedule it looks like July 14th. We're not doing it. It's not like we're taking a break until July 14th. 2025 or something, but no. After Cascade Effect next week, we are going to be starting with Titan Effect. So as I often say, please look forward to that. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody!
Om